amongst all of this work, there's a story about designing and patenting a phosphorus recovery plant.
Yeah, the phosphorus recovery thing's another interesting aspect that I got into, which is, it just amazes me how the whole mining, mineral processing end comes together when you start talking about some of these things. Occidental Chemical had a phosphorus plant in Murray County, Tennessee, located right outside of Columbia, and they produced elemental phosphorus from phosphate rock that was mined all over the area. So they had mines all over the place. They had a concentrating facility or preparation facility. They had 2 of those where they took the ore and concentrated the phosphate rock and then fed it into an electrical arc furnace to produce elemental phosphorus. So they had all these contract operations all around the area, but they weren't, it was all contract, so they didn't deal with the mining aspects other than they owned the reserves. So I dealt with some property issues associated with that dated from owning the reserves where they actually owned some surface and things like that too. As part of the elemental phosphorus production facility, through what you basically do is you vaporize elemental phosphorus and then you condense it and you get a phosphorus and you get a slag. You get a slag, you tap off the bottom of the electric arc furnace and you have the phosphorus is condensed, and you have vapor issues. You have to run ESPs, electrostatic precipitators, and things like that, and you generate a sludge. And Occidental's process, it was an older plant that had been built by Shea Chemical, and it wasn't really designed quite as efficiently as the other plants. There were a number of other plants. Monsanto had one down there. FMC had a plant in the immediate area, so because that's where the phosphate ore was, very similar to the concentration you had of plants down in Florida as well. But Occidental wound up with a huge slag inventory, or let's call it a sludge inventory, that was phosphorus that had condensed and was mixed in with dirt and mud, and essentially frozen at room temperatures. It basically condenses it, and it was kept in ponds with water on top. And if you took the water off, the pond would catch fire because you exposed the phosphorus, and the elemental phosphorus would catch fire. And it was an issue that had to be dealt with, and because it was a legacy environmental issue, ultimately came to Glen Springs. I got involved in it. They were looking at using they had been doing some recovery just so that they could show that they were making some effort using a steam system to try to recover a little bit of elemental phosphorus out of it. It wasn't very successful. And Monsanto had done another system where they used, trying to think of the name of the process, but they had developed a process where basically they took sludge and put sludge into a sealed container, heated the container up in a molten lead bath, and then vaporized the phosphorus off of that. So they were using that, and Occidental had started to go down that path. And I got involved in it, and we did a lot of work associated with this. Wound up with a couple patents out of this whole thing. I think we did 4 patents in total, of which I think my name's on 2 or 3 of the patents. But we did a lot of work associated with it on how we would recover sludge, basically remine the ponds. And so we developed a mining technology and then a beneficiation technology where we would concentrate the segment of the sludge that actually had phosphorus in it and take out the rock and other particles, and then feed that into a process. And we developed a chemical process with chromic acid to break down the bond, the shell around the phosphorus, so it would coalesce and we'd wind up with elemental phosphorus out of it. So we spent $15 million constructing a facility that included a remining aspect of mining, and we tried different concepts. We tried some concepts where we dug phosphorus out of the ponds, fed it through a crusher. We tried some continuous processes where we actually cut it out just like a cutting head, different things like that, and then feed it into our beneficiation train and then feed it into the plant. So we built the plant to do this and recovered elemental phosphorus for a few years. This was a mining problem. It was purely a mining problem, and here we were in the chemical industry and dealing with it from a mining standpoint. And the only chemical side of it really came down to when we did the chromic acid work, but that's mineral processing at the end of the day too. So it was really a mining problem. It was actually a very interesting project. We built the plant. We ran it for a few years. We were the only merchant producer of elemental phosphorus in the United States because Monsanto was still producing, but they use all their phosphorus internally for Roundup. So they were up in Idaho and they were mining phosphate rock up there and producing elemental phosphorus and then using it internally. So we were the only merchant producer of elemental phosphorus in the United States. Unfortunately, we were competing with the Chinese. And anytime you're competing with the Chinese, cost has no bearing on the real value of this when you're dealing with the Chinese, just has no bearing. And so the Chinese undercut us to the point where even though we were doing remediation at the same time, it was just non-economical. And so we basically shut down and then capped it in the same method that FMC had used on their facility up in Pocatello, Idaho. So we basically mirrored some of the capping technology that FMC had used because they had a very similar problem up there with a facility they shut down, and we used that same concept down in Tennessee. But we were able to do that because we had demonstrated to the regulators that we had done a very diligent effort in terms of phosphorus recovery from this, and to the point where the economics weren't there anymore, and they let us cap it. So we tore down the $15 million facility that we built.
But hopefully that knowledge is recorded somewhere.
Knowledge, it's in patents, so it's available for anybody in the patents, and we've actually let the patents expire. Initially we kept those patents in a number of countries and then let them expire as they came up because we decided there wasn't a whole lot of interest in the technology. But it's a unique problem, but it was a unique solution. And I look at this that if I didn't have the mining background, I wouldn't have come up with a solution. And so it's just interesting when you see how you apply this.